You're watching Let the Quran Speak. Innovation in religion. In modern times, we think of innovation as a good thing. Why is innovation considered bad in religious matters? How do we ensure we retain the true values within Islam while advancing with the times? With me is Dr. Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. So, Brother Shabir, how does Islam view innovation?
Generally, the classical tradition was suspect of innovation in terms of dealing with religious matters. Of course, at one level, there was a suspicion of innovation more generally. But as time goes by, some innovation or new things become inevitable. And so the position was shifted to say, well, let's prohibit innovation when it comes to specifically religious matters. But if the matter does not touch upon something that is specifically religious, especially our ibadat or our worship, well, let's accept those. And let's say, well, innovation in mu'amalat, in transactions, would be okay, but not in ibadat, to make that kind of distinction.
So there are many dire warnings about introducing innovation into the religion.
Yes. After the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died, naturally Muslims wanted to preserve those good old days. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was here. He was showing us the right way. Now there are many people, evils are arising everywhere. People are coming up with newfangled doctrines and teachings and practices, things which have no basis in the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. How do we navigate through all of this maze with so many claims and counterclaims? So two related concepts arose among Muslims to deal with this confusing situation. One was the idea of following the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. It is clear in the Quran that Muslims have an obligation to follow the Prophet. The Quran commands us directly, obey the Prophet, follow him. But Muslims in his time would have understood this in a general way, and they followed the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a general way. They went where he went. They answered his call to go out and defend the nascent Islamic community when it was being attacked by outsiders. When he called for the prayer, they went there. When there was a sermon to be delivered, they went there and attentively listened. So they took him as their leader, they obeyed him, they followed him, whatever commands he gave them, they carried out. But then, after his death, Muslims became interested in all of the finer details of his life, and they refer to that as his Sunnah. And they became interested in following all of these details of his life, thinking
and they didn't
that
have this direct connection anymore, where they could ask the Prophet Muhammad
exactly.
questions. Yeah.
In his lifetime, if he did something, they might have asked him, are we required to do this or not? And he might have said no. He might have given his opinion on a certain question, and they would ask him, is this part of the revelation given to you, or is that your opinion? And if he said, that is my opinion, then they didn't feel the compulsion to follow him. Although they may have as well have followed him, as we may follow the opinion or advice of somebody else, especially a sage person as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the known leader and prophet of God. Why not? But if somebody did not want to follow that opinion, then one had the option. After the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, it was not easy to make this distinction anymore. If somebody reported that they saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, acting in a certain way at a certain time, it was no longer clear whether this was a one-time thing that he did or whether this was a regular practice of his. And even if it was a regular practice, did he mean for his followers to copy him in doing that? So the safest thing for Muslims now was just simply to follow everything. Because if you followed everything, God wouldn't ask you on the Day of Judgment, why did you not follow that one thing which you were required to follow? So to be safe, follow everything, and then
and don't introduce anything new.
Yes. Well, the flip side of that, so that was the one thing, the Sunnah, following this new concept of following the Sunnah, meaning all of the detailed activities of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And the flip side of that was to shun or avoid any bid'ah or innovation, because innovation then will be a new thing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, didn't do. Somebody else has come up with this now. We can't follow that.
Something different from the Sunnah or the Prophet's way.
Yes, because the idea is that the Prophet's way is so complete, and we are required to follow that. that if we were to follow something else, that is obviously contrary to following the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a wholesome way. So where the Prophet stopped, we stop. What he did, we did. What he didn't do, we don't do, and so on. This became now the prevailing mindset, and this has survived in the technical literature, or we can say the legal literature, and the classical Islamic discourse about this.
So how do we deal with what are considered innovations today then?
Well, naturally, I said that in transactions, innovations came to be accepted. Even in worship matters, some innovations were unavoidable.
Like what?
Like, for example, the collection of the Quran to begin with.
That's true, yeah.
In the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there was no official copy of the Quran that was circulated among Muslims. Some Muslims had some written copies of certain parts, and some may have had even some complete copies, but there was no official sanction given to the written copies. It was about 14 years later, after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the Caliph Uthman had written copies officially sanctioned, circulated among Muslims. Of course, it was already collected together by Abu Bakr, but it was not distributed among the Muslims during his lifetime.
So there was a sense that it was an important and good thing to do, despite the fact that the Prophet hadn't sanctioned it.
Yes. In fact, the report about this in Sahih Bukhari says that when it was first proposed, some objected, saying, how can you do something which the Prophet, peace be upon him, didn't do? But because they saw that it was something good, they decided to do it. And nowadays, of course, we use the Quran, and this is an act of worship to recite the Quran as the book of God. We recite it from the official copy, which should have been seen as an innovation, but wasn't, because it was a good thing.
Could we also say that the Hadith Collection, I mean, the same thing, people were writing down the Hadith where the Prophet didn't explicitly say that people should do that?
Yes, yes. In fact, there are statements showing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, do not write from me except the book of God, which means that we should not have written down his hadith. But over time, people saw the need to write down the hadith, and in support of that, we can find some snippets here and there where the Prophet, peace be upon him, might have allowed somebody to write some hadiths on some occasions, and they took that as a general permission to write the hadith books on the whole, because of course we needed these books, so we wrote them. So in short,
so are there good innovations then? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, there are some good innovations in that, and this is clearly brought forward in a report about the Taraweeh, or the night prayers of Ramadan. It is said that the Prophet, peace be upon him, prayed a couple of nights in a row, and then he said to the people, pray in your houses. And people remained praying individually and separately. Some began coming back to the mosque after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they were praying there in disconnected groups. And when Omar saw this, he brought them all together to read behind a single imam or leader, a reciter of the Quran. And this became the practice from his time onward. So here Omar was introducing something different from what the Prophet, peace be upon him, said. But he said that this was a good innovation. Omar said this was a good innovation.
So how do we differentiate very quickly between a good innovation and a bad innovation?
Well, I think we should be careful before making any internal changes to the ibadat or worship in Islam. We should hold these to be sacred and try to follow the Prophet's example in these matters. But if there is something, after some discussion and deliberation and careful study, that is so pressing, then we should welcome it as something that is conducive to the furtherance of this practice, its survival, and its reception among Muslims now and in future generations.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, we'll answer questions we receive from you, our viewers.